Hello and welcome back, guys, to the Big Blue Purple channel. Today, I want to talk about a question I've seen asked around the internet a little bit, which is Final Fantasy XIV good as a solo player? If you're someone who doesn't have a lot of friends into this game or any friends into this game, but you're interested in it and you want to try to get into an MMO, I genuinely do believe this to be the best solo MMO you can play right now. Before I actually start talking about why I think 14 is good solo, I want to explain what I'm talking about when I say solo. I mean getting into the game with no friends who play, not avoiding multiplayer content. This is an MMO, so you will have to play team-based multiplayer content. It's just match-made and very easy to find. You're not going to need friends or Discord to meet people. That being said, in a recent live letter, which is basically this game's news drop every 2 months, it was announced that the main story quest, the 2.0 main story quest, will be getting a rework for a trust system, which will let you run dungeons with NPCs instead of real players. So this may continue to become a better solo MMO with updates, and especially coming in 6.1 here. But for the time being, any dungeons prior to the Shadowbringers expansion are required to run with a match-made party. This shouldn't intimidate you at all coming into this game. If you played something like Destiny or any multiplayer games, it's not a stressful experience to be matched with other players who are also just running this content. So with all that stuff out of the way, why do I think Final Fantasy XIV is a fantastic solo MMO? Well, there's a whole lot of reasons, but I want to start by talking about the story in particular, because I think it's the main draw to this game in general. So what kind of content can you expect in the story? Well, it took me around 400 hours to complete the entire main story quest, with all the expansions, while also doing the raid quest lines, trial quest lines, and necessary job quests. So tons of the main storyline is just a lot of quests that you do on your own in the open world. Go kill these enemies, go fetch this or that, go talk to this NPC, and occasionally you'll come across a dungeon or a trial. These are your multiplayer instance activities. So dungeons are 4-player activities with 2 DPS, a healer, and a tank, and trials are 8-player activities with 4 DPS, 2 healers, and 2 tanks. And speaking of these roles, before I move on, I just want to briefly touch upon, if you're a solo player, don't worry about which class you play. You can still play any of them. I've mained Dancer, I've mained White Mage, I've mained several different classes that are, team supports, and played completely solo, just, doing my own thing, helping my team the way I can. I guess what I'm trying to get at with this is don't be afraid to play like a healer when you're a solo player just because, oh, well, that's a party, support class, and I'm just a solo player. If you want to heal, go right ahead and heal. It's not going to take any extra communication per se. Maybe just let the tank know, hey, pull less ads, pull more ads, whatever. And I don't want to turn this into a which role should I play guide, but I do want to also say that each role has their drawbacks and benefits. If you want to just play a DPS class and you want to be, a selfish solo player like me who mains DPS, then you're going to have to put up with slightly longer queue times for your activities because guess what? Most people also want to play selfish DPS. And if you play something like healer, you'll have basically instant queue times, and tank is somewhere in between. Alright, with that tangent out of the way, let's get back to talking about solo play. So, the dungeons and the trials, those are your kind of general content in Final Fantasy XIV that you'll be running into a lot. As for just single-player content, you can run into these solo instance duties, which are basically just story missions where you go through a special area and complete some objectives, whatever. Okay, now that I've briefly gone over, what kind of content you're going to see throughout the main story quest, let's talk about the plot itself and the actual, storyline. I think this is, like I said earlier, the biggest draw to the game. It's so goddamn interesting. And the way it unfolds across all of these expansions and the length of this story is kind of its greatest strength. I found that, Shadowbringers and Endwalker near the end benefit so much from all of the stuff that happens before that, and those two expansions are just on another level in my opinion. in terms of video game storytelling, are some of the best I've ever witnessed, up there with Xenoblade Chronicles. An effect this story had on me, actually, was while I was working my way through it, I would just talk in Discord with friends like usual, like I usually do when I'm playing video games, but eventually I realized that I wanted to actually pay attention to the dialogue and just fully get immersed in that. So I started playing this game outside of Discord calls and just trying to focus entirely on the plot. And I think that speaks numbers of how good this story was, especially for someone like me who avoids story games generally for this reason. This vast storyline is the reason I see 14 as a step above all of its competitors as a solo MMO, because story is truly a good solo experience. Like, going into World of Warcraft or something, you're probably just going to buy a level skip and skip all that story and not give a shit. But in 14, like, that's the point. Buying a level skip is, recommended against in 14 because you're missing so much of the actual content of the game. You don't want to skip to the end because you need all the context first. So now that I've gone over the story and gushed about it plenty for one video, I can make a million more gushing about this goddamn story. Let's move on to some solo aspects of gameplay, and I mean, like, completely solo. So what about crafter or gatherer classes? These are just like your go gather materials or craft item classes that are leveled up through doing so. And 14 crafter or gatherers are actually very interesting compared to a lot of other games. You don't just go, like, mine rocks or hit trees. You actually get unique, like, moves like any other class that you have to use to find your nodes or whatever. I personally haven't actually messed around too much with crafter or gatherers, but from what I have done with miner up to level 20, is you get certain abilities that help you detect certain ores, and then you get, speed increase abilities that you're supposed to use. It's a lot more involved than you might expect. Now, if you're anything like me at all, you actually don't care about any of that shit at all, and you don't want to do any crafting or fucking gathering at all. So, let's talk about another solo feature in Final Fantasy XIV that I think makes it super great, which is the unsync feature. Basically, what this does is it lets you go into old content at current level. So, in 14, the way content is built is it's set at a certain level, and you will be synced down to whatever that activity's level is. So you look at just the base game raids, the Binding Coil of Bahamut, those are at level 50. But, Endwalker's level cap right now is level 90. So let's say you go back into those raids and pick the unrestricted party option or the unsync option, you will be level 90 and completely demolish those old raids. So what this allows for, essentially, is, a solo player to go into a lot of the old raids. The Binding Coil of Bahamut is a good example of this. These don't have matchmaking. Now, the raids going forward after that have a normal difficulty, which does have matchmaking. But essentially, the Binding Coil of Bahamut was on Savage difficulty from the start. So it doesn't have a normal difficulty with matchmaking. But you can go back into these raids solo, and you can just clear them and get all the loot from them and see those raids for the first time. I think the Binding Coil of Bahamut, like I said, is a really good example, too, because there's a storyline to go with it. And if you care about that storyline at all, you don't have to worry about finding a party to experience it. You can just go in there, unsynced, at level 90 or 80. I did it at level 80, and it was still perfectly fine. And you can just clear all of those up and see the story for yourself and get some cool items to show for it. Unsync feels like a mechanic designed for a player like myself who really likes high-end raids and is interested in doing them, but doesn't exactly like finding parties. Eventually I did get past that fear and just started joining party finder groups and progging Savage and stuff. But initially, I just kind of wanted to see the raids, see what they were like. You skip all the mechanics, you don't actually get a solid experience of what the fight might be like, but you get to see the visuals, you get to see what you're missing out on, essentially. And that, in of itself, kind of gave me the push to say, hey, I want to see the newer raids. I want to go in and find some people to party with. But hey, that's a separate topic. This is, again, a video for people who just want to play solo. Now, I just want to touch upon something that I personally find really great, which is the essentially solo achievements that you can earn in Final Fantasy XIV. And what I mean by this is there's like a lot of titles in this game that are solo achievements that are very difficult to obtain. For instance, the Necromancer title, which is obtained by soloing all 200 floors of something called Palace of the Dead. If you don't know what Palace of the Dead is, it's essentially a procedurally generated dungeon with random floors that you have to progress through with different traps and treasures to find on each floor. And it's typically a 4-man activity. That being said, it is possible to solo the entire thing, all 200 floors, but it's insanely difficult. I believe this is one of the rarest titles in the game, if not the complete rarest. And there's another one like it called Lone Hero for getting the same achievement in a different deep dungeon called Heaven on High, which is the same idea, but you're climbing up instead of down. I think these achievements are super great for the game because it gives solo players an equivalent to the ultimate raid titles like the Legend or whatever. It gives solo players essentially even a more impressive title than that because you don't have anyone else to fall back on. It's all on you to complete this insane achievement perfectly. And stuff like this is really important in a game to me. Like in Destiny 2, which is a game I played for far too long, they had similar achievements to this, like solo flawlessing certain dungeons for an emblem or whatever. And those kind of flexes, I think, are really important for solo players because it gives them incentive to go try hard things that they might not have been, ever plan on doing before. If you consider yourself any type of like hardcore solo player who, wants to be the best without ever playing with other people or doing that kind of activities, this game has some stuff for you to work towards. Don't worry about that. There is plenty of options for solo achievements for you to go grind out. If you do want to do the harder content, though, and the harder group-based content, you can find groups in-game without using, separate things like Discord or Reddit or whatever. There's actually a in-game function called the Party Finder, and that function essentially allows you to build parties for the non-duty finder activities, which is basically the non-match-made activities. These party finder groups rarely ever use voice chat from my experience, so if you're one of those people who just doesn't like voice chatting with others or is just nervous around a group like that, you don't have to worry, actually. A lot of groups in this game don't bother with that and actually prefer to do it without a mic. Anyways, to kind of summarize what you'll be expecting as a solo player here, basically, 70 to 80% of the main story quest is just going to be a solo experience, running back and forth doing quests, with the occasional dungeons, trials, and then the 24-man raids. Don't worry about the 24-man raids. I know the word raid might be scary to some solo players, because a lot of other games are super involved raiding, but these 24-man ones are super straightforward, super easy. You have 23 other people to make up for your mistakes. So that stuff aside, that's pretty much all the multiplayer content you're going to expect from the main story. And as for side content, the deep dungeons are fantastic solo things to work towards if you want those big achievements, and the unsync party option is super, super good for experiencing old content that you can't exactly find a group for anymore. So yeah, overall, there is no shortage of things to do solo in this game, and the main story alone is 100% worth your time. Just take your time and enjoy your ride through this game, man. There's so much fucking content here, it's honestly really mind-blowing. And if you can get your friends to play the game, I imagine the fun you could have is incredible. But hey, all of my friends play dogshit games, so I will continue to play as a solo player. If you learned anything from this video, or felt like it helped you inform your decision at all, I would greatly appreciate it if you subscribed to the channel and left a like. It is free. Now get out there and play yourself some Final Fantasy XIV.